did travel to Miami, but that is not a place that we have known that there's any cluster of coronavirus. And he has tested positive, lives in Westchester, works in Manhattan, has been with his family in Westchester. So we are now going through possible connections to track down possible connections to find people. The SAR school in Riverdale closed. That is today. That's a school that one of the children attended. There may be some more schools that voluntarily close just until they determine exactly if there were children who might have exposed other children, because you have to now track back all of these situations. The gentleman our information is the gentleman had an underlying respiratory illness, and he is ill, and he is hospitalized. That's juxtaposed with the case we talked about yesterday, which was a 39-year-old healthcare worker who is positive, but she's at home. She's not even hospitalized. And they said, why isn't she hospitalized? Because she has mild symptoms, right? We're all focused on the spread trajectory. The real fact that's relevant is 80% of the people who get this virus will self-resolve. They may not even know they had the virus. It will be like a flu with mild symptoms. 20% could get ill. And the lethality rate, estimated by CDC, 1.4%, which is about double the normal flu rate. But again, with populations, senior citizens, immune compromised, and people with a underlying illness. So that's the overall picture. We also have two families in Buffalo who traveled to Italy, and the part of Italy that has had an outbreak. Those two families are now being tested, and they are isolated in their homes. So we're seeing what we expected, what we anticipated, which was a continuing spread. The increased testing and getting up that testing capacity, you can see how important it is now. Our capacity was only a couple of hundred tests per day. You take one of these situations and you're tracking back possible exposures, you see the numbers increasing very quickly. So getting our testing capacity up is critical. We're working with private laboratories where Department of Health will share their testing protocol with those laboratories, but increasing the capacity of testing by bringing on those proven labs. And that's also ongoing. We've made good progress on that. SUNY is contemplating having the students who are in abroad programs come home. We'll have a final determination on that by the end of the day. There's a practical reason why you might want students to come home before travel from that country is stopped. So SUNY is going to be deciding that today. We announced, as you know, insurance regulations that will protect people who have to pay any costs. I'm going to amend the paid sick leave bill that I sent to the legislature to add a specific provision that says people who, because of this situation with coronavirus, have to be quarantined, should be protected. Their employer should pay them for the period of quarantine, and their job should be protected. And I'm going to make that amendment to the paid sick leave bill that I sent up. Last point, the legislature passed yesterday an emergency appropriation of $40 million and emergency measures to allow the state government the ability to handle this situation. I think, first, as a piece of legislation, it was critical. These quarantines, when we say someone has to be quarantined or we have to set up a congregate quarantine facility, you need the legal authority to do that. You know, you can't just say, people, it's a voluntary quarantine. To get all this testing capacity up, I have to be able to say to laboratories, I need you to cooperate with the state government on this. So those emergency measures were critical. The amount of money was critical. And if you needed any proof of how urgent that bill was, look at where we are this morning. But I want to applaud the Senate leader. I want to applaud the Speaker for how quickly they moved. Speaker likes to say to me, you have a conference of one. He has a obviously much larger conference. I say, yeah, but my conference of one can be more difficult than your conference. But it's important that people know government is working, and government sees it, and government is doing what it has to do, and it's not caught up in politics, and it's not caught up in any confusion. You know, they look at Washington, we have so much going on, and you have Washington fighting with themselves. New York is the exact opposite. In one day, both the Senate called back everyone to do the vote. The Assembly stayed late at night to work through the vote. And I can't tell you how confident that should make New Yorkers feel. Because here you need government to work, my friends. You need competent government that steps up and gets the job done, even when it's challenging and even when we're going down a path that no one has gone down before, which is where we are. So I'm very proud of what the Senate and the Assembly did. And with that, I'm going to sign the bill. And then we'll hear from the Senate leader, and we will then hear from the Speaker. The conference of one, after much debate, signs the bill. Congratulations. Congratulations. Senate leader.
Yes, well, you know, we've had often our conferences and the Conference of One have heated discussions and disputes, but what we all understand is that we are here for one purpose, and that is to make sure that New Yorkers are getting the actions, the reactions that they need in order to be confident in their government. And so, despite any of what might happen, because each of us have the same focus, the right things happened. I did not think when we gavelled out that we would be gaveling back in. This was the first for me as a leader. But given the facts, given the circumstances, that was the right thing to do. And I'm very, very happy that our House came back together and we passed this important piece of legislation. Little did I know that this morning I would wake up to find that in the county I live in the city I represent, there is an active case. I had to tell that to my daughter on her way to work at a hospital. And because of our actions, I was able to tell her with confidence that we are preparing to step up, to lead. We have amazing health professionals. You know, you see Dr. Zucker here. And again, a group that can come together quickly and just stay focused on what's right. So I'm thank you, Governor, for your quick action, and of course to my colleague, Speaker Hasty, who is always willing to, he really does have I have a big conference, but his is even bigger. But the fact is that size doesn't matter in this instance. Yeah, I figured I'd wake you guys up. But and with that, thank you, Governor. I'll turn it back.
A comment about the governor with the Conference of One. I was going to say sometimes I don't know which one I'm going to side with in the Conference of One. But I think one of the takeaways that should be from the swift action is that I think in coordination and in the briefing by Commissioner Zucker, Dr. Zucker, I don't think there's a more prepared state. I don't think there's a more prepared health department to deal with the situation at hand. As the governor said, it's a situation we've never kind of dealt with before. And some of these decisions, time is going to be of the essence. And so I think the quick coordination and for the Department of Health to be able to make swift, decisions that may end up happening simultaneously in, two different counties, I think is the reason why the members said that they thought it was important to move this bill to allow the governor as the head of the state to use his leadership and to allow Commissioner Zucker to use his leadership for what's best for the state.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think just to echo what the Senate leader and the speaker said, these are uncharted territories. Government has to respond. Government has to respond quickly. It can't be a situation where we have to do something. We have to quarantine people, and we say, well, hold on a second. We don't know that we have the legal authority. We have to go pass a bill. We have to do this. You have to be able to move. This is everyday matters here. And we have to have the funds to do that, the resources to do that. And that's what the bill was about yesterday. Also, as a matter of course, I work very closely with the Senate leader and the speaker, and as things come up, I inform them right away, sometimes in the middle of the night, just to make sure they have the same amount of aggravation that I do. But we're in close communication on all these events as they come up and the actions that we're taking. Any questions?
If I could just ask you about the Westchester case first off. Senator, you said it's in your district. Is a person from Yonkers?
New Rochelle.
New Rochelle. Okay. And do you know if they use public transit, Dr. Zucker? Or
We are tracing back. What we know is 50-year-old male went into the Lawrence Hospital, works in Manhattan, is now in a hospital in Manhattan. We don't know how he commuted into Manhattan. We're checking whether or not he took public transportation. Where the children go to school, we're tracking that down also.
So you said one was at the school in Riverdale.
One was the Riverdale SAR school, which on their own accord closed this morning. Lawrence Hospital?
Yeah, that's in Bronxville. And then he was transferred.
Transferred to a hospital in New York City.
What do you do in that situation? You know the town, you know the hospital, you know the kids. Is there anything specifically you'll do in that area that you'll hone your resources to ensure that that specific area is more precautions are taken?
This is a good question, Joe. You do the best you can, and basically you track it back. It's like a detective going back and following the string, right, as far as it goes. On the case yesterday with the 2 healthcare workers who flew in from Iran, we're actually going to contact people who were on the airplane with them, even though we don't believe they were contagious. So here you would, the gentleman has tested positive. His children have to be tested. They may have been exposed. What school were they in? What classes? And track it back. Obviously, at one point, it becomes so broad that you really can't, but you do the best that you can. And the macro picture, right, the quote-unquote containment phase, when you have a case, you track it back to slow the spread, and then you reduce the flights coming into the country from the other end. And that's, quote-unquote, a containment strategy. By definition, it is an imperfect strategy. You cannot contain the spread. You can slow it, you can limit it, but you can't contain it. That isn't a cause for anxiety either, because, well, what happens when a large number of people get infected? Which you're going to see a spread. By the way, I said 2 weeks ago, it's just a matter of time before we see our first case, then we saw our first case. I said yesterday, you will see a case of community spread. Here we are today. There's a case of community spread. I am telling you, it is inevitable, but that this will continue to spread. It is inevitable that it will continue to spread. But what does that mean? The basic fact, 80% of the people who get it will self-resolve and may not even know that they had it. That's 80%. 20% may get ill. Lethality rate, according to CDC, 1.4%. Lethality rate for the normal flu 0.6%. Double what the normal flu would be, if the CDC is right. And on the normal flu, you don't even know how many people in this country passed away last week because of the flu. So there has to be perspective here and a context for all of this. It will continue to spread. At the end of the day, most people won't even, who get infected won't even know they had it.
What about the person's occupation? Do you know what that is and whether there's...
An attorney.
So was his firm, like you have to, like you said, you have to kind of work back. Do you have to check out the flight from Miami to New York and then go to the law firm, all this kind of stuff?
Everything gets checked out. This is epidemiology practice. We'll trace all the individuals that we can he was exposed to.
And do we know, how many children does this person have? Do they all go to the same school? And kind of as a matter of course, is this going to be, if, you know, person X gets infected and they have children, do we automatically close schools? Do you suggest that schools close?
So we do know about his family, and we're following up with that. There's one child who's in the school that the governor mentioned. Regarding the flight to Miami, just to make sure everyone's clear, that was a while back, so it wasn't when he was in an infectious period, so I don't want people to get confused about that.
The state law already gave the executive branch broad latitude to suspend certain laws and provisions in cases of emergencies. Why did you need to include further language to expand that?
Yeah, a suspension of a law isn't enough. Okay, I suspend an existing law, but that doesn't give you the ability to do anything. Right? You can't do anything. How do you do quarantine? How do you do anything? You know, suspension of an existing law means I'm removing an impediment from an agency, but it doesn't give you the ability to affirmatively do anything. And in this situation, government has to act. Quarantine is going to have to be done. Congregate quarantine is going to have to be done. You may get into a situation where you do have to take actions vis-a-vis closing schools. You don't do that by a suspension. You would do it by an affirmative act. You may have to put in hygiene protocols in public transportation, public buildings, et cetera. So all of these things could very well happen, and you need the legal authority to do it. You can't say, well, I would institute a hygiene program, but I have to wait for the legislature to come back because they're on vacation.
You know, the legislation is drafted, gave that power clearly in the event of a disease outbreak, and you clarified that for a disaster declaration. But you also included a litany of other instances in which you could exercise these powers. A cyber event, high water.
Yeah. You can't, that's wrong, your hypothesis.
That was what the bill said.
Yeah, let me tell you what the bill said. The predicate are the disasters that were authorized in that bill. So it just took the existing disasters and said for these disasters, not only can you suspend the law, but you can actually do affirmatively what you need to do. Right? Facts matter, Jimmy. They may have added cyber crimes, but it was that, where's Beth?
Here.
Is that correct?
It's the existing list from the definition of disaster in section 20.
Yes, but you're talking about needing this power to manage a disease outbreak. Why not, when you give yourself the new power to issue directives, to essentially affirmatively, you said you need to make law, why not limit that to disease outbreaks? Why include, for example, cyber event, hurricane, volcanic eruption?
I will answer your question. Because that would be stupid to do what you suggested. So you recognize the law is deficient. You recognize just suspension of a law doesn't give you the ability to do anything affirmative. Fix it for this situation, but don't fix it for the other situations. So next week, when we have a flood and government is in handcuffs, then come back and fix it for floods. And the month after that, when there's a fire and government is handcuffed, come back and pass another law for that. And then when you have a possible terrorist attack, but you can't do anything because you're handcuffed, come back and pass another law for that disaster, right? That would be unintelligent, in my opinion. It's any of the disasters. And that's what it is, any of the disasters. So read the bill.
Potential cases in Buffalo, were there two families or one family?
Two families in Buffalo.
Can you confirm?
The part of the bill that Jimmy was talking about is sunsets next year, next April. By the way that you're talking about it, do you just want that made permanent?
Well, let's see where it is in the table.
Can you confirm whether the state saw false positives using the CDC coronavirus test last month?
Can you say that again, please?
Can you confirm whether the state and scientists or city scientists saw false positives using the CDC coronavirus test last month? There was a ProPublica report about that.
We have the one positive in the state of New York, and that's the only one we know. That's from our test. Regarding what the CDC is doing with other states, I can't comment on that.
Governor, regarding the quarantine issue, and also, Doctor, do you have any thoughts as to what kind of scenario would there have to be? Something people don't want to think about. I think it's the prudent thing to do is to have these conversations. Apparently, you're acknowledging you've had these conversations about potential quarantines. Under what circumstances would a quarantine be called?
Well, we're doing quarantines. Today, the Buffalo families.
I'm sorry, I meant like a community or, you could quarantine all of New York City, you now have that power. You had it before, I think, but.
Well, the quarantine has to meet the circumstances, right? No one is talking about we're talking about congregate quarantine facilities, meaning you may have to find a building, a hotel, which is what we're using now in some cases to quarantine people. But nobody's talking about a geographic quarantine.
Right. But under some scenarios, that could legally happen, right?
Under some scenarios, anything could happen.
But we're about 20 or so days away from a special election taking place in a few areas, and then obviously April 28th. Any concern right now about public outings like elections?
No. No
Governor,
concern.
regarding quarantines, so right now you're saying somebody is being quarantined in a hospital. What's the difference between that situation and somebody who's in their home? Like,
There
is
are
somebody
three types of quarantine. We don't call quarantine in a hospital quarantine. We call it isolation when you're in a hospital setting. There's home quarantine, which is you stay home, in your home. And then there's congregate quarantine, which is if you don't have a home or you can't be quarantined in your home because you may infect other people, we find a hotel or a congregate facility where you can stay in that situation for the quarantine period, which is about 14 days.
Now, regarding the hospital situation, is there a different protocol that's being undertaken that's different than a normal isolation?
Is isolation for coronavirus different than isolation for another?
It's similar to any other respiratory illness.
Could you talk a little about, now that New York can do the testing, Dr. Zucker or Governor, about what people should know? Should everybody be going and getting tested for coronavirus? When do you encourage people to get testing? And, the governor suspended some insurance issues last night if people wanted to get tested or seek help.
Well, I think there's a couple parts here. I think first, a good common sense and judgment on some of these issues. I think that if someone is ill, they should speak with their health professional, give a call a clinic if they need to, and then initially to take the necessary precautions, which we've spoken about: cough into your sleeve, sneeze into your sleeve, wash your hands, and stay home if you're sick. And if someone in your house is sick, stay home as well. So that will slow the spread of a disease and also protect the individual. And I think that then we need to tailor situations as necessary as the situation evolves.
So let's take one more.
If you want to test like 1,000 people a day or have the capacity to do that, how do you see that process playing out?
That's a good question, Joe. again, it's balancing the system, right? You have to have a protocol on the front end of who you will test or who needs to be tested. And the front end has to be met by the back end of the system, right? So the number of tests that you're bringing in have to be the number of tests that you can perform. We're not at the 1,000 per day test level now. We're at the couple of hundred tests per day. So you prioritize who can be tested, right? You'll have a lot of people, especially if in this situation where I think you have heightened anxiety that is not factually based. But you have heightened anxiety, people say, oh, I want to be tested just in case, just in case. Well, you don't have the capacity to test everybody just in case. So there'll be a protocol that the Department of Health sets up that says, we will test you if this, if you went to a place, if we tested you for flu and it didn't come back, et cetera. But the number of people you test has to meet your capacity. So you adjust the initial protocol along with your capacity. But you can see how quickly the numbers multiply, your point before.
But you're right, everybody's going to show up at the doctor's.
Yes, yes. And that's why the Department of Health sets a protocol on what people are prioritized to get tested. You know, well, I'm an anxious personality and I just want to be tested. Yeah, but we can't just test all anxious personalities, and that's the protocol to the front.
Right, and that's what we're working on to make sure you don't end up testing every worried well that's out there.
Let's take one more.
Can you provide any details on how the funding would be allocated before we
The
begin?
funding is allocated for need. So we're talking now about buying additional masks, buying additional test kits for these private labs that will conduct the tests. They need the agents that allow you to do the test. Quarantine facilities cost money. We're going to use a hotel for quarantine. Okay, that's money. Additional staff, et cetera. So it's for priority needs as they develop. I want to thank again the Senate leader and the speaker for a phenomenal job yesterday, and especially in light of today, you can see why it's so important that people have confidence that the situation in the state of New York is under control, and they should feel that, and they saw that yesterday, thanks to your good work. Thank you. Outside of?
Outside of just hospital facilities or homes?
Yes, there are other facilities.
How is the spouse of the woman diagnosed yesterday? Is he confirmed positive? Waiting for